Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
Hello everyone, this is your favorite president, Donald J. Trump, with some very exciting news. By popular demand, I'm doing a new series of Trump digital trading cards. You all know what they are. We've had a lot of fun with them. It's called the America First Collection. 50 all new stunning digital trading cards. It's really something. These cards show me dancing and even me holding some Bitcoins. We are announcing the launch of Trump coins, a true symbol of American greatness. Trump coins are designed by me and minted right here in the USA. I've seen a lot of coins out there using my very beautiful face. I'm a very beautiful guy, I'm only kidding. But they are not the official coin. RealTrumpCoins.com is the only place to get an official Trump coin. Here to introduce something really special. I think you're gonna love it. My new Trump watches. We're doing quite a number with watches, and the quality to me is very important. The Trump Victory Tourbillon. This isn't just any watch, it's one of the best watches made. Get your Trump watch right now. Go to gettrumpwatches.com. It's Trump time.
Well, guess who that was? We're going to talk about that clip in just a second. Very excited for today's guest. She is CNN's Dana Bash. We'll chat with her in just a little while. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, that clip, it's really great that he's putting out those coins right now. Are they chocolate coins? Is it just in time for Hanukkah? Hanukkah gelt? What do you think? Maybe you should sell that. Trump Hanukkah gelt.
Well, they're genuine silver. I know that. Genuine silver for $100, and it's less than $30 worth of silver. So somebody's making some money on this.
This is the Republican nominee for president 6 weeks from an election, and he's hawking a ton of shit. This is on top of the sneakers and the NFTs, like
the Bible.
Well, it did have a constitution in it too, so it's more than a Bible.
2-in-1, the Trump 2-in-1 Bible.
Yeah.
Only $59, was it?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, where are you going to get a Bible?
You get to see him dancing. You get to see my very beautiful face. I'm a very beautiful guy. Only kidding. No, I'm not. $100,000 for the Trump watch.
Yes.
$100,000. Now, he's selling all this really expensive shit. At the same time, his wife, Melania, is talking about the needy people in America because of inflation. And he's selling $100,000 watches. Sounds like the Republicans got some money.
I don't think the money that he's getting is going to any charities for some reason. I just don't think so.
All right, let's get to our big things today, the campaign and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Polls. There's some interesting polls that came out this week. One that shows that Harris is losing young voters, people under 30, which was really surprising. But she's gaining in the 65 plus category. But she now leads Trump by 3 points, which is a significant shift from the last poll. It's also the first time in 24 years a Democrat has led in this category. And the bigger question really is this okay? In terms of a trade-off, give me 65 plus any day of the week than 30 and under. People over 65 vote. People under 30 don't really vote the same way. Younger voters comprise about 13% of likely voters, while the 65 plus crowd consists of 29%, more than double. But the real bigger question is, why is she losing young people? How is that happening in an election year where there are so many critical issues that affect young people?
Let's just say if you're a young person, you've only lived your life knowing freedoms with reproductive rights. And so it's just so hard to imagine that they can't play out the scenario of what can and will happen if Trump wins. I mean, just that alone.
Well, for me, it sort of stems back to my frustration and to some degree anger over what happened since October 7th of last year, where young people on college campuses were so passionate about the Gaza issue. And here we are staring down the barrel of an election that could continue to strip them of bodily autonomy. could worsen the climate change situation, could have no impact positively on gun violence and mass shootings in school, that is literally an existential threat to our democracy. Why aren't young people today, as we near this election, as passionate as they were over the Middle East, which is thousands of miles away? But where is that same passion and anger and outrage and righteousness when we in this country are facing such a crisis?
I really don't know. It's an excellent point.
I think it's complicated, and I think they're inextricably linked in many ways. Not that it makes sense that they are, but I think that young people, they don't feel like they're being listened to, and the Gaza issue is part of that. And it doesn't make sense from all the things you just said, but it may be part of the explanation is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know. A New York Times Morning Consult poll came out today. Last month, Arizona and North Carolina were tied. Harris is now up 3 points in Arizona and 2 points in North Carolina. She's gained also in Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. She's dropped 6 points in Wisconsin, but still leads by 3. And she dropped 3 points in Georgia, which is now tied. I mean, every other day there seems to be a poll that comes out, and, you know, sometimes there's an outlier, but the polling is interesting. It does kind of show momentum. This morning, inflation numbers came out, 2.2%. You know, when you watch a Trump rally and you listen to Republicans, it's like the world is falling apart. Mm-hmm. Inflation is out of control. It's out of control. 2.2%. I don't understand the disconnect between the obvious, clear strength as gauged by the leading economic indicators that we have used in this country for decades to judge in a bipartisan way the strength or lack thereof of the economy. Yet somehow there's such concern about the economy when you look at any one of the metrics, including inflation, which is no longer a problem the same way. How do you have people walking around saying the economy is a disaster?
Because people are lying. And it's the news that people are receiving is only presented in a partisan way.
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on there. It's true that inflation on a macro level is going down. But it's also true that people going shopping at the supermarkets is not affecting the prices of the things that they're paying for right now. And so they have this memory in their head of Lucky Charms costing $4 a box 2 years ago and now costing $6 a box. And that's the literal inflation that they see every day.
Well, that's partially right.
I'm not saying that's Biden's fault or anything, but that's the reality of what...
prices are coming down.
Yes, some of them are.
Yeah,
gas
go to the
is
gas
at a good price.
pump,
But
go to New Jersey, it's under $3 a gallon.
But Trump is playing off of this perception.
Well, to more of Jen's point, he's lying.
He's totally lying, but people are able to believe him because they see certain things in their lives that are more expensive than they were before, but that has nothing to do with anything he's saying.
We still are dealing with the issue in Springfield, Ohio, with the Haitian migrant situation and the cats and the dogs. Let's go to this clip.
These guys actually want these people in our country. It's not even believable. Working with left-wing nonprofits to inundate Pennsylvania communities, changing the character of small towns and villages all over our country and changing them forever. They will never be the same. They will never be. Do you think Springfield will ever be the same? I don't think. The fact is, and I'll say it now, you have to get them the hell out. You have to get them out. I'm sorry. We get them out. Can't have it. Can't have it. They've destroyed it. It's terrible. It's terrible to say, and it's a tough thing to do.
God, if you're a student of history and you watch what happened in the streets in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, like, this is what his rallies sound like. You know, kick them out, send them back. Like, it's really so vile. But I do think it's really hurting him with the voters he desperately needs and keeps pushing away. You know, the suburban moms, the independents, moderate Republicans, people who don't like hearing all this xenophobic, racist, incendiary rhetoric. It's just complete lies. And it's disgusting. Also at that rally, he talked about Ukraine. Let's play that clip.
As president-elect, if I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelensky and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal. This is crazy. What a horrible thing has happened just because, and it's our fault because it's a war that should have never been allowed to happen. We didn't have countries fighting each other. They wouldn't have done it without my permission. They would call me up to ask whether or not they could go to war with some other country. And I said, you can't do that. And if you do that, I'm going to put big, big taxes all over you. Okay, we won't do it. And then call me up the next day. We've decided not to go to the war.
Do you think world leaders really call up Donald Trump and ask,
should we go to war? I just want to make sure.
You're not going to tax me, are you? Okay, Donald, we won't do it. I mean, he's
such a window into how he operates.
Yeah, well, as a narcissist, a malignant narcissist, to sort of tell the world that everyone calls you up and asks you for permission, foreign leaders, I mean, that's some serious emotional trouble right there in my
Well, the only thing he left out of that lie was usually they said, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, in different. Well, he didn't do that because he'd have to say it in like different languages.
No, that's right.
Yeah, and then a reporter tried to follow up and like, because he's always saying like, first of all, with Trump, everything that's bad in the world would never have happened if he was president, and everything that's bad in the world he will fix day one, immediately. Like that's going to be a busy day for Donald Trump. January 21st. There's like so many major things in the world that he has promised to fix day one. But with regard to the Ukraine-Russian situation, a reporter asked him for specifics. Here's what he said.
I believe I will be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly.
But what does that look like? Or what does that look like? What does that?
I don't want to tell you what that looks like.
I don't want to tell you what that looks like because I don't know what it looks like. Because it looks like nothing. It's invisible. You ever see invisible? It's nothing. Nothingness. That's why I can't tell you. I'll tell you in 2 weeks. That's when I'm going to say everything in 2 weeks.
10 years of this guy already, and I'm still astounded by what comes out of his mouth and his behavior, as if like I'm a schmuck and I've never seen any of it before.
His MAGA people, there's no bottom, there's no end, there's nothing.
Quite quickly.
And you know when you like we're in a bad relationship with someone and like everything just starts to annoy you, especially their voice, right? I'm at that stage in my relationship with Donald Trump. Where like when I hear him say like
you're way past that stage. You are way past that stage.
But like when I hear him say like
quite quickly,
like just the way he pronounces and emphasizes words, it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. Abortion. If you didn't loathe Donald Trump before and think he is out of his friggin' mind, check this out.
I am your protector. I want to be your protector. As president, I have to be your protector. I hope you don't make too much of it. I hope the fake news doesn't go, oh, he wants to be their protector. Well, I am. As president, I have to be your protector. You will no longer be abandoned, lonely, or scared. You will no longer be in danger.
He sounds like Dr. Phil.
Any longer. You will no longer have anxiety from all of the problems our country has today. You will be protected, and I will be your protector. Women.
He's the Prince Charming.
Women will be happy, healthy, confident, and free. You will no longer be thinking about abortion.
I will come to your house at night. I will tuck you in. I will give you a little kissy on the forehead. Maybe I'll grab a... Nah.
Jen, you're the only woman in this room. Do you feel protected?
He's the Prince Charming I've been waiting for my entire life.
Is your anxiety gone?
Poof.
Do you feel like you have your bodily autonomy back?
Thank goodness. That was so scary. I can't imagine being a young person, either man or woman, listening to that and going, yeah, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. That's so ridiculous.
Right. You would think that might have put it over the top.
Maybe.
It's like, excuse me, sir, you overturned Roe v. Wade. where more and more women are unable to get an abortion, which might be the reason why we won't think of abortion anymore because we can't get one. Like, it is just so outrageously offensive what he just said. He's the protector.
And that's
the rapist. The rapist is the protector.
I mean, I'm old, relatively speaking, and I can't imagine hearing that language. Like, that must have been what it's like when you were married in like 50? Don't worry, I'll take care of you. You don't worry about anything. I'll take care. Don't think about decisions or read.
That should be like a new season of The Handmaid's Tale, right? Like, that is the creepiest thing. It's so creepy. And what does he expect women to be like? Yeah, Donald Trump is protecting me. Right. But wait a minute, I can't get an abortion anymore. Or I may go to jail. He wants to punish me if I get an abortion.
But what he said was essentially, well, first of all, listen to the audience applauding him like crazy, which is insane. But what he said was really what an abuser says to someone they're abusing. I'm going to take care of you.
Right.
This is someone who's a rapist that says that, not someone you'd ever want to actually know.
Right. It is so pathologically sick and disturbed and twisted. Listening to that man he is not only the guy who killed Roe v. Wade, he's an adjudicated rapist. He's an admitted grabber of women's privates. He's a monster.
Yeah, that's what a monster says to somebody.
God. So, all right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner is Mike Johnson, who worked with top Democrats in passing a spending bill to avoid a government shutdown that did not include Trump's demand of the SAVE Act that would have required proof of citizenship. My loser, Eric Adams, for corruption and abuse of power charges that distracts from the major issues that New York City really needs.
My winner today is independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, or Klippenstein. Although I'm not really a fan of his work, I do think he did the right thing by being the first person to publish the hacked 271-page oppositional research paper about J.D. Vance. My loser was a tie between Mayor Adams and Mike Johnson, actually.
What?
I know. Well, Mayor Adams for all the obvious reasons. Mike Johnson because upon leaving, because now the House is out of session, he would not commit to regular session if Kamala Harris wins to say that they would go into regular session to do the process that they do. Instead, he indicated that it would depend on whether it was a free and fair election.
My winner, Nebraska State Senator Mike McDonnell, who said he would not vote before the election to change Nebraska's election law, making it a winner-take-all state, thus killing Republicans' dream of stealing the one electoral vote from the 2nd Congressional District, known as Omaha's Blue Dot, one of the state's 3 congressional seats, which Democrats typically win. My loser, Congressman Clay Higgins of Louisiana, for his vile, racist post about Springfield, Ohio Haitians. He wrote, quote, "These Haitians are wild, eating pets, voodoo, nastiest country in the Western Hemisphere, cults, slapstick, gangsters. All these thugs better get their mind right and their ass out of our country before January 20th. Crickets so far from the Republican Party. And honorable mention to Mayor Eric Adams. All right, that gets us to the weekly rant. In just about 6 weeks, America's going to hold what many people believe is the most critically important presidential election in our 248-year history. I'm one of those people. I believe Donald Trump represents an existential threat to democracy and that we're at the doorstep of a constitutional crisis. Not to be an alarmist, but we are dangerously close to the reality that a year from now, we could be living under the kind of tyranny we've only known through world history books. That said, I'm confident that at that time, we're going to be actually winding down President Kamala Harris's first year in office. And at that time, I also believe that we'll begin realizing that Trump's ultimate legacy will be that he united moderate Republicans, independents, and Democrats against him and MAGA extremism, uniting us in the fight against incivility, corruption, conspiracies, lies, lawlessness, treason, and total insanity. Trump will be remembered most for for creating a fertile landscape where Republicans like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Jeff Duncan can begin to rebuild the GOP, where Republicans and Democrats can begin returning to the good old days of arguing about taxes and deregulation, trade wars, abortion, and guns, instead of rigged elections, assassinating opponents, and eating cats and dogs. Look, even if Trump loses in November, we know he won't ride silently into the sunset. We're definitely in for another year or two, perhaps even more, of more exhausting Trumpian insanity. But mark my words, he will eventually disappear from the national stage. And when he does, the millions and millions of his previously apolitical, apathetic rock dwellers will crawl back under and be the angry, silent minority once again. Because there will be no more rallies full of mocking and name-calling and nastiness. No more Jerry Springer show. Politics won't be entertaining anymore. It'll just be politics. And politics was and always will be boring as fuck to most Americans, especially Trumpers. Now don't get me wrong, we will still experience the residual ugliness of Trumpism, but it'll be reduced to the random racist quack like Clay Higgins, and not the entire party. But in the meantime, it is comforting and assuring to know that there are millions and millions of Republicans, conservatives, and independents who have joined together with Democrats these past several years to ensure that Donald Trump will never, ever, ever step foot in the White House again. That's something, at least, and we have Donald J. Trump to thank for that. All right, let's get to Dana Bash. She is CNN's chief political correspondent and the anchor and host of Sunday morning's State of the Union, serving as the network's lead reporter covering campaigns and Congress. She regularly acts as a moderator for CNN's political town hall specials and debates, including CNN's first debate of the 2020 election cycle in Detroit. She has conducted sit-down interviews with major players in the political sphere during 2016, including Donald Trump, Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Marco Rubio, and Senator Bernie Sanders, and Governors Jeb Bush and John Kasich. Her debut book, America's Deadliest Election, The Cautionary Tale of the Most Violent Election in American History, written with David Fisher, went on sale earlier this month and was an instant New York Times bestseller. Dana, welcome into the back room.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
Congrats on the huge success of the book. It's an instant New York Times bestseller, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. First, just want to spend a few minutes talking about the current political landscape, and then we'll get to the book. So you and Jake Tapper moderated the first presidential debate. That was a debate that we all know at this point had tremendous impact on the campaign, resulted in President Joe Biden's withdrawal. I'm a big fan of yours. I think you're a terrific journalist, and you fact-check guests on your show like few other people do.
I was like, I'm waiting for the but.
There's always a but. It's a good but, though. It's a good but. But there was a decision by you and Jake and CNN not to fact-check, which was somewhat different than the one subsequently made for the second debate by David Muir and Lindsay Davis and ABC. What was the thinking behind your decision?
The thinking behind our decision was that historically in debates, whether primary or general election debates, and let's just stay with general election because that's what this was, that's not a thing that happens. That the way that moderators have approached the debate is that the moderators are the facilitators, and the fact checkers are the candidate's opponent. And that was true. That has been true, except for one exception in 2012 when my former colleague Candy Crowley, who is an amazing person,
sure was,
terrific journalist, did it on the fly fact check of some words that then President Obama used in the Oval Office about terrorism, and it blew up and it became a big thing. And aside from that, since like Kennedy Nixon in 60, that's just not been the thing that that moderators do. And we decided to follow those rules. There was no fact checking in the Trump debates of 2016, the general election debates, or the primary debates of 2016 or 2020. The difference, of course, I'll just preempt what you're going to say. The difference is that by 2024, we know what Donald Trump does, even though I would argue we knew that in 2020 as well. And there is a school of thought, which ABC adopted, that Donald Trump is a different beast, if you will, that he is somebody who just does not tell the truth more than your average politician, and that he should be held to a different standard. That's what ABC decided to do. We didn't. We approached it in the more traditional way, as the general election debates did in 2016 and 2020 and the decades prior to that.
Well, Chris Wallace did a bit, I think. I think it was 2020. He tried.
No. He followed up, but he didn't fact check. And there's a difference. And we did that. I mean, I followed up, and Jake followed up a lot when they didn't answer the question, which the ABC moderators chose not to do. They didn't have a lot of follow-up. They fact-checked, but didn't have the, you have X number of seconds left. You didn't answer the question. The question was, which we did. And then the other thing is, and look, like, I'm not going to criticize anybody, and there's a hell of a lot of criticism that comes our way, and it always does for anybody who moderates any debate. It's
especially now.
It's an honor, but it's definitely you're in the firing zone, if you will. And then the other thing that I would say is, imagine if we would have approached it the way that ABC approached it, given what happened with President Biden in that debate. I mean, already Donald Trump is saying, well, it was 3 against 1.
Right.
I mean, it would have been us jumping in, and it would have understandably have been perceived as us jumping in and helping President Biden, because he wasn't articulating the arguments that he wanted to articulate in a way that nobody expected.
No, I get all of that, and
what are your thoughts? It sounds like the way you're coming.
No,
from
it's just a very complicated thing. I think on some level, with at least some of the questions and answers, I think there's probably a little bit of a finer line between fact checking and following up, because at the end of the day, it's getting to the same end. It's just trying to qualify something and get to the truth of what someone says or believes. But no, I think it's in this climate, it's a really thankless job. The only thing I would say is that there are a lot of people out there who believe that when you go into a debate and you know that there is one candidate who is so unprecedentedly untethered from the truth and reality, that making a conscious decision not to do it kind of gives that person the advantage and makes it almost impossible for it to be any kind of a debate that will have meaning to viewers at home, to voters. But I do get the point that, especially with Trump, you kind of have to do that all the time. I mean, if you're going to do it, it has to be done all the time. So my personal opinion, for the most part, is that let Trump be Trump. Just let him ramble, let him talk. And it almost doesn't matter, because his MAGA supporters are going to love him no matter what he says. But it's everyone else that really is going to matter in this election. And I think I trust the audience at home enough, I think, to see and hear stuff and go, oh, that guy's not for me, or she's not for me, or whatever, And when I watched the first debate, my takeaway was, oh my God, what did Joe Biden do and not do? It wasn't what did Jake Tapper and Dada Bash do or not do. And I think that's to your point.
Well, yeah. And the way I know Jake and the rest of us at CNN approach a debate is, if at the end of the day we are not the story, that's success.
Right.
It's truly to facilitate a conversation. And I will say that had Trump said the election was stolen, we would have fact checked him. But he didn't.
Surprisingly.
Yeah.
It's probably the one time he doesn't say it.
Yeah.
And you did the interview with Kamala Harris, which seems nobody was happy with. Democrats were like, it was all Republican talking points. And Republicans were like, there wasn't enough follow-up, which, again, is a thankless job, especially in this toxic, polarized climate. Does it even matter anymore? Because there's such a outcry now. Oh, she needs to do more interviews. She should do more interviews. What is she afraid of? You've heard it all, obviously. Yeah. Does it matter, especially now, 6 weeks from the election? Is that something that is really that important for her to do?
Well, no. I think, well, of course, as a journalist, I think she should be talking to the press regularly. But I think that speaks to the underlying questions about her, what she stands for, what she's going to do, and, people wanting more access to the answers to those questions. And, one of the things that I've been saying on my show a lot, because I'm kind of obsessed with this, is the demands for her to say what she's going to do and give us more policy. She's already in a month, or however long, 2 months, given more policy specifics than Donald Trump has.
Right. Well, that's the double standard.
And there's a huge double standard. Now, the obvious difference is that people know what he's like as president, because he was president for 4 years. And they don't know what she's like. And, she's obviously been vice president, but it's not the same. And the whole way this all came about was so quick and jarring, and she didn't go through the regular primary process that we generally see from candidates. So I think there's all of that is sort of built into I'm not so sure. But her favorabilities have gone up dramatically. So people kind of feel better about her. They like her, which is not nothing in this environment where people hate all politicians.
Right. Before we move on to the book, one last question. Before that interview, Trump posted that you have, quote, a chance at greatness, quote, to reach real, capital letters, real stardom. So I want to know, do you appreciate having him as your career counselor?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Do you think you failed him? Did you fail him?
Oh, I totally failed him. Yeah. I totally failed him. He did not like my interview because he thought I was not tough enough on her, just as you said. And then I interviewed J.D. Vance a couple of weeks ago, who said I gave her multiple choice questions, whatever that means. That's one of those situations where I feel like the Democrats thought I was too tough on her. The Republicans thought I was not tough enough on her, so maybe I did something right.
Yeah, no, totally. When both sides aren't happy, you've done something right.
Republicans and I'm talking about the real partisan, the extremes.
Yes.
On either side. But wasn't that a great post? Honestly, it made me laugh. On and on and on, and then it just signed it, dash DJT.
Yeah, well. It's like any one of his posts. It's like his Merry Christmas post, like Merry Christmas, everyone. And then he becomes an absolute vile monster in the rest of the post. So let's talk about the book. I would imagine most people, myself included, are not steeped in Reconstruction era state level election history. And we view the 2020 election as the most violent in history, given what happened on January 6th, 2021. But clearly we're wrong. So tell us about what happened in the Louisiana Gubernatorial election in 1872, which is the focus of your book.
What happened in that election is that it was truly corrupt, truly full of fraud, unlike the allegations of the 2020 election, of which there was not enough evidence presented to any judge in any court or to the Trump Attorney General of the United States. Back then, it was just a complete and total mess. And so much so that at the end of the election, nobody would concede. The opponents for governor, the two candidates for governor, were sworn in by their people. There were two legislatures in Louisiana sworn in. So you had two basically two non-functioning governments side by side. And what's the reason for all this? You mentioned it was Reconstruction. The reason was race and racism and segregationists in the South, in Louisiana, in this particular story, realizing that in the election beforehand, the first election during Reconstruction, post-Civil War, the first election that Black voters, Black men, were allowed to vote, they did vote because, of course, they voted. And they voted for Republicans, who, remember back then, it was kind of reversed. Republicans, they were the party of Lincoln. And they elected people who were going into government to help protect their civil rights and their transition from slavery to citizen. And they also elected people who look like them. So, nowadays when you hear, oh, it's the first Black something such and such since Reconstruction, that's what it is. It was that small window when in the South, Black voters were able to vote before the white citizens and the white people who still ran the government all over the South realized that they needed to do something to disenfranchise the Black voter and intimidate them and mess with the voter rolls and do everything that they possibly could to depress the Black vote so that they didn't have the rights that the Constitution at that point then afforded them. And what happened was there was violence on the streets of New Orleans, pitch battles, and that rippled out to other places, other parishes in and around Louisiana. And it got, the worst was in a Grant Parish named for Ulysses S. Grant, who was the president at the time, of course, former general, Civil War hero. And there's a town called Colfax in Grant Parish. And at least 150 Black men were murdered in cold blood. Horrible, horrible massacre. And they were murdered because of all what I just described, because of the racial strife, because there was a big back and forth about whether or not the votes in that parish counted, and sort of a lot of the fraud, that some of it went on the side of the Republicans as well. In order to try to find justice for these Black men, they knew that trying the people who were the murderers in state court for regular murder was not going to go anywhere because the jury of their peers would not convict them. So they were tried in federal court on civil rights abuse charges. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided in what's known now as the Cruikshank decision that the federal government doesn't have a role in the civil rights of Americans. The federal government doesn't have a role in the rights during elections of Americans. That is up to the states. And so Louisiana, like other southern states, said, we agree. And that was the beginning of the Jim Crow laws that the southern states were allowed to enact that lasted for a century until the modern civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s.
So in that 1872 election, there's intimidation, cheating, fraud, racist violence, the quote-unquote white man's candidate, a partisan media, no peaceful transfer of power, lawbreakers portrayed as heroes and patriots, highly consequential Supreme Court rulings. That sounds eerily familiar.
And I'm going to add to that, one of the main characters, he was elected governor in 1868. His name is Henry Warmoth. And he was a Republican, a Lincoln Republican, who was a carpetbagger, came from the North into Louisiana, saw opportunity for power and prestige, and ran for office, and eventually became governor after the Louisiana Constitution was rewritten and approved after the Civil War. And the way that he was described in the papers back then and in, sort of the academic writings about him, it is eerie how familiar a character he was. He is somebody who people loved to love, loved to hate. He had charisma. He had principles that were flexible, depending on what would and would not keep him in power. And he also understood the power was one of the first people to understand the power of elections and the people who are in charge of elections, and to manipulate the returning board, as it was called in Louisiana, canvassing board in other states, but the people who actually decide whether to certify the elections. He understood that those are the people he needs to control, and he did. And there were just stories written in the partisan media about how nobody could really understand why and how this guy's supporters loved him so much, no matter what he did. Most of them knew he was corrupt. They knew how flawed he was, but they didn't care. They would follow him.
Now, there's another striking similarity, which is the 1872 Louisiana and the battle in 2024 Louisiana over the congressional map, which is still disenfranchising black voters. The title of your book includes the phrase "a cautionary tale." In some way, are you sounding the alarm bell based on these striking similarities?
Absolutely. Because, I have said since starting to really understand what went on back then, which that for me, that did not start until after 2021. Had I, as a reporter covering politics, had a better understanding of what went on, not just in 1872, but also in 1876 during that presidential race, I would have covered the 2020 election and the 2021 chaos in a different way. I would have had such a part of, I think, being a good journalist is understanding history. Like when people say to me, should I cover, they're coming up and they're going to college, should I study journalism? What should I study? I always say either study English or history, because you need to know and understand what comes before you to have a better, more solid, more foundational understanding of what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. So how is it informing your decisions now in 2024?
Oh, yeah. One way is I am much more adamant on my show Inside Politics, which is during the week, about, particularly now as we're getting close to the election, doing as many segments as we can about what's going on in the states with the threats to the election workers, with the rules inside the states. I would have probably been doing that a lot more post 2020 and 2021, seeing all of the sort of monkey business that went on, or at least attempted to go on. But in 2020, there was an attempt to mess with the votes that pretty much failed, because the system's held by a thread, because you had people of integrity who were part of the same party as President Trump, but they said, no, this is not what the rules say. This is not what the law says. No, I'm not going to do that. Now the laws in some of these states are different. They were changed by the Republican legislatures in Georgia in particular. And so now what? And so understanding, just to kind of go back to your question, understanding how not just the vote, like day of voting, but the counting of the votes and the structure of that was so manipulated back in the 1870s. I understand and see the danger in those systems not holding, because they didn't hold back then. They fell apart.
Mm-hmm. from a standpoint of progress, civil rights progress, sometimes it just doesn't feel, especially when you consider like the 2013 gutting of the Civil Rights Act by the Supreme Court, it doesn't feel like in 152 years that have followed since 1872 that we've really truly made much progress in that front. Is that a cynical statement?
No, I think that there's definitely been progress. But think about what you just said, 150 years. And that's one of the, by the way, progress, which there's been some backward movement, which is what you're referring to with the Supreme Court decision in 2013. But I think so let's go back to the Reconstruction era and wonder what if this Cruikshank decision that I just described after the Colfax massacre didn't happen, and the federal government was more, and at the time it was President Grant, was more aggressive about making sure that the civil rights and the safety of these new Black citizens was like front and center, instead of having to deal with his own issues of allegations of corruption, which are separate from that, and being so worried about bringing the country together, which is totally understandable, that he just kind of put a Band-Aid over a wound that never healed.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you fast forward to 1876, which we haven't talked about, the other thing that happened was that because of the corruption and the fraud, not just in Louisiana, which happened all over again in the 1876 election, but in other states, 3 other states, they sent multiple slates of electors to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And it was decided that the vice president didn't have the ability to decide which, but it was simply ceremonial. So those states were thrown out. It was an electoral college tie. There was a commission formed. One person on that commission, one man, basically decided who was going to be the president. There was a backroom deal. He decided that the Republican, soon to be President Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes, would be president. And the backroom deal was that if Hayes became president, he would pull the federal troops who were in the South. They were kind of in and out, but they were in most of the time to help protect the security and safety of these Black Americans in the South, that they would pull out. So imagine if that deal didn't happen, and that there were federal troops who really maintained the peace. Because what we found in this book is that there was all this violence and threats of violence, and there were these militias and white supremacists and the KKK, but that when the federal troops came in, they backed down. So if they would have stayed until there was real, or at least closer to equality than we ended up with, we wouldn't have had the ensuing 150 years of just complete and total segregation and dehumanization of American citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just reminds all of us of how these decisions, which might not seem so big with our government at any given step of the way, have hugely consequential impacts on society and on culture and on everything that has to do with the way that our government in our country works and doesn't work.
Yeah, you write about it, 1876, and it's just another parallel, similarity to the current political landscape with that role of the VP. And it's just fascinating how we're still dealing with the same kinds of issues, except to your point earlier, unlike 2020, things have changed that are reasons for sounding alarm bells now. We don't have Mike Pence. We have J.D. Vance. We have people who might this time around do something very differently, which is just chilling to think about. Before we go, I just have a question, or it's actually more of an observation. As a Jew, I was so moved by your segment with Wolf when you went to Poland and went to Auschwitz and did the March of the Living. That must have been an incredible. I mean, we saw some of that on screen, obviously. But off screen, I would imagine that was just such a deeply moving thing for you to have done, given your family's history with the Holocaust.
It was, and I what you didn't see is that my brother, I'm one of two, I have one brother, came as well, and to be able to experience that with him and to be in this place where our great grandparents were murdered. They were just brought in. They were Hungarian, so they were brought in on trains, and they just went right to the gas chamber. And we saw basically what we believe was what was left of the gas chamber that they, where they died. And these were proud Hungarian people, and they were very assimilated. They thought of themselves as Hungarian first and Jews second. And to be able to, because there are a lot of different ways that people who are in families of survivors, either sometimes the survivors talk a lot about it and many times they don't talk at all about it. We're from a family where there was a lot of talking about it. So we've heard lots and lots of stories from our grandfather and then our mother, who was born at the end of the war, but in America. And to actually be there, it was, and I honestly never really felt a pull to go to Auschwitz. But I had this opportunity to go, and I was like, of course I will go. And I'm so glad that and obviously to be there with Wolf, who lost all four grandparents.
Yeah, he has quite a story of his own.
Parents survived really horrible conditions and then found each other afterwards.
And so then what do you make of, since October 7th last year, this heightened anti-Semitism and rhetoric and hate crimes in this country? It is quite alarming.
It is. I did an hour special on CNN in the summer of 2022 on the rise of anti-Semitism. And so it was already happening. But most of the hour was about it happening from the right. And it was about real deadly crimes and attacks that were just raw hatred. And at the time I said, I really want to do one of the segments in this hour about something that's bubbling on these college campuses, because you're hearing more and more about progressive Jews who are part of progressive groups who are being kicked out of those groups because they say that I am a supporter of the notion of a Jewish state of Israel. And, I got a little bit of pushback. I'm like, oh no, progressives wouldn't do that. I'm like, most wouldn't, no, but it's happening. And so we told the story of one young woman who had to leave school because she was getting so intimidated, and the school leadership said, well, that's politics. There's nothing we can do about it. And then it happened, in a big way after October 7th. And it took a while, and a lot of schools still don't really, they're dealing with it better now in the fall of 2024 than they did in the spring of 2024, but it's a complicated thing. It's a very complicated thing. But anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism, and we know it. When we hear about Zionism, I mean, my uncle, by marriage, my aunt's husband, grew up in Poland, and they were kicked out of Poland in 1968. And they were kicked out. They were told the Zionists must leave. They didn't say Jews. They said Zionists. Everybody knew what they meant.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a phenomenon that I'm not used to in this country. I mean, for me, because anti-Semitism always came from a certain place. Now it's coming also from liberals, progressives, and fellow Jews. So it's kind of like, what the heck is going on? But I just don't know where we're headed. It's a pretty precarious time we're living in.
Sure is.
Dana, good luck with the book, America's Deadliest Election.
I feel like we should say something happy. Like, I feel like people are going to walk away and be like, oh my God, I'm going to go drive off the road.
Well, okay, I'll say something happy. Kamala Harris is going to win in a landslide in November. I can't get more happy than that.
Prediction?
That's my prediction. And I just recently talked with, last week, do you know Professor Alan Lichtman from American University? He's successfully predicted every presidential election since 1984. His prediction is Kamala Harris. He's never been wrong.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, and so I'm taking it a step further. I'm saying landslide. So there you go.
I'm going to book him. You just gave me a booking idea. I'm going to book him on the show.
He's great. You'll love him.
Oh, no, I know him, but I somehow didn't know about his track record.
The only time he was quote unquote wrong was 2000 when he picked Al Gore. So we know how that ended, right?
Didn't know about the hanging cat.
But thanks again for coming on. Good luck with the book.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you.
Likewise. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.